Okay, so we are on chapter 2 of part 2 of the first volume of the Memoirs of the Princesse de Ligne. And where we had left things last time, our editor had foreshadowed for us some events involving the Prince Bishop that were going to affect our princess, that were going to affect Helene. So let's find out what those events are. While Helene was bringing to a close the story of her peaceful years of convent life, the reputation of her beauty, her name, and her fortune had spread beyond the walls of the old abbey. The young princess had already made her appearance at children's balls. The Duchess de Mortemont, de Chatillon, de Chalais, de Choiseul, and others whose daughters or nieces were her companions often took Helene out with them. More than one mother, anxious for her son's improvisation in life, had turned her thoughts towards the little Pole and disposed her artillery with a view towards securing auxiliaries in the field. The young girl was not long in finding this out, but with much discretion she appeared not to notice anything. Her plans were already marked out. She was better acquainted than anyone with her uncle's weakness of character, and knew well she would only make the marriage she chose. Two suitors came forward at the same time. The first was the Duc d'Elbeuf, Prince de Vaudemont, second son of the Comtesse de Brionne, and the house of Rohan Rochefort, and of Comte Charles Louis de Lorraine, Grand Equerry of France. Though of such noble birth, the prince's fortune was small, and an alliance with a rich heiress was for him the chief object in view. The Countess de Brionne, an intimate friend of the Duc de Choiseul, saw Helene at the Chanteloup. The grace and charm of the young girl attracted her attention, and on returning to Paris, she carefully informed herself of both Helene's present and future prospects. It has not been forgotten that at the beginning of her memoirs, the little princess mentions the Countess de Rochefort as a friend of her uncle's. This lady and her friend, the Marquis de Mirabeau, were among those who frequented the Countess de Brionne's receptions. The Marquis de Mirabeau was, as we know, a great friend of the Bishop of Wilna, and kept up a constant correspondence with him. Nothing was therefore easier than for the Countess to procure all the information she desired. It was in this small circle that was woven the matrimonial plot which is now to be unfolded before our eyes. And we can see how in those days, as at present, slight importance was attached to mutual feelings or to conformity of taste or character. Fortune, rank, and name were the only conditions required. It was decided that the Marquis de Mirabeau should open fire by writing to the bishop, but it was felt that he could not bring the affair to a good issue unassisted. His haughty and violent temper and uncertainty of his disposition required the controlling influence of a feminine mind. The right person was ready to hand, and Madame de Palis, whose intimacy with the Marquis was well known, was deputed to assist him in this matter. And we have a footnote. Madame de Palis was the daughter of Captain de Malveaux of the Swiss Guard. Her family came from Bern, but her father's rank keeping him in France. She had been brought up there, and while still very young, had married Monsieur de Palis, a Swiss officer, also in the French service. Her husband took his pension and returned to Lausanne. Madame de Palis often went to see him there, but she continued to reside in Paris, and was in fact completely separated from him after the year 1762. And it says, for more detail, see Memoirs of Mirabeau by Lucas de Monti, the Comtesse de Rochefort and her friends by Louis de Lomenie. And so he says, Madame de Palis was very pretty and possessed a quick, shrewd intelligence, well fitted for intrigue. The great Mirabeau, who had good reason to hate her, wrote as follows: This woman has the cleverness of 500,000 demons or angels, if you prefer it, but she is equally dangerous by reason of her beauty and her intensely designing disposition. We are not concerned with the unedifying position that Madame de Palis occupied in the Mirabeau family. We merely conclude that she must have conducted herself with sufficient reserve or decency, as it was then called, to be admitted into the society of the Comtesse de Brionne and that of her aunt, the Princesse de Ligne Luxembourg. The Black Hen, as she was called by her intimates, was delighted to play a part in this affair. She desired, beyond everything, to be useful to such great ladies, and neglected nothing to attain this end. Madame de Pally's letters were quoted in her society as models of sentiment and elegance. We may add of acuteness and moderation. Madame de Pally to the Princesse de Ligne, Luxembourg. Paris, 26 December 1777. I enclose, Madame, a copy of Monsieur de Mirabeau's letter to the bishop. On handing it to me yesterday morning, he said, "Be assured that this negotiation will succeed. Providence will aid you. I could not have written you this morning, but having suffered all night from a violent attack of asthma, I employed the time in doing so. It may have suffered from my condition, but nevertheless I think I have said all that was necessary." He begs the Comtesse de Brion will forgive the freedom with which he has spoken of her and her family. He thought it advisable to preserve towards the bishop the same frankness he has always shown him, and moreover that his letter should not appear to have been dictated. The abbé was quite satisfied with it. And we have some footnotes here. The Marquis was ill and very much taken up by trying to obtain an order for the imprisonment of his son at the Bastille. And a second footnote, the Abbé Badeau, who thoroughly understood the bishop's character, having been attached to his service in 1772 during his first stay in Paris. We are agreed as to what he, the abbé, should say in his letter. He will resolutely treat the question of the dowry and will make all necessary observations. He even adds that in order to influence the undecided character of the bishop, he will enclose in his letter a copy of the answer he should send the Marquis de Mirabeau. The abbé has often used this plan with success on previous occasions. He does not appear much alarmed at the competition of the modern prince, and following the usual bent of mind, which leads him to believe in what he wishes, he does not doubt for one moment of our success in this affair, and will carry it through rapidly. The Marquis de Mirabeau was perhaps not the best person for a negotiation of this sort, and his nature was certainly not conciliatory. But in spite of his violence, his tyrannical character and fantastical ideas, his was not an ordinary intelligence. He had much observation and expressed his ideas in an original, glowing, and picturesque style, though occasionally somewhat obscure. The Marquis de Mirabeau to the Bishop of Wilna. Paris, 25th December, 1777. My lord, my gratitude for your kindness and the affection I feel in return for the friendship you have conferred upon me have caused me to entertain an idea which I think suitable both as regards the greatness of your family and your own happiness. I have conducted the affair to the point where, if it meets with your approval, it can be further developed, but without compromising you in the slightest degree, should it have other intentions. Or should you have other intentions, rather. I know your affection for the scions of your illustrious family, whose destiny, both law and nature, the will of their ancestor, and their own helplessness have confided to your care. I have not forgotten that it formed part of your plan that the young princess, your niece, should be established in France. I have heard that she has given much satisfaction, and that each day she has shown herself more worthy of your care and affection. I have therefore thought of an alliance worthy of you in every way, next in rank to our princes of the blood, who, though always peers of the blood, were only raised by law above other peers less than 2 centuries ago. We have nothing in France that can equal the House of Lorraine. This family is now reduced in France to 2 branches. One of them is almost extinct, the only remaining male representative being the Prince de Marsan, who has never married. The other branch is that of the princes of Lambesc, grand equerries of France, at whose head stands the beautiful Comtesse de Brion, whom you know, and who occupies her position with as much dignity as splendor. This princess has been left a widow with 2 sons and 2 daughters. The 2 princes are the Prince de Lambesc, grand equerry, and the Duc de Delboff, a young prince 18 years of age, of a fine, noble mien and gentle character, with whom all his family are satisfied, a rare thing anywhere, in the present day, especially with us. The eldest, the Prince de Lambesc, has until now refused to marry, with a persistency that time alone can overcome. His younger brother even went so far as to throw himself at his feet to implore him to do so on one important occasion. And we have a footnote: that important occasion, his proposed marriage with Mademoiselle de Montmorency. The two brothers are very amicable. It is on the Prince de Buff that I have cast my eye as representing in the interim the sole hope of his family, and I thought it well not to delay. Madame de Brionne is very clever, very watchful over the interests of her family, especially with regard to the settlement of her children. Active without being restless, noble and elevated in her ideas on general matters, easy on questions of detail, amiable to the exact degree or extent she chooses, but having never displeased anybody or anything any more than her own mirror. This is not a portrait, it is a plain description, such as is necessary, for all depends upon her. She will be a pillar of support to the young princess, who, with her noble mind and ardent feelings, will prosper under such guidance. To the young couple also, who will require sustaining and directing, and lastly, to your lordship, when you come to live amongst us, for if I cared for society, I should prefer the dull moments of Madame de Brionne to the wittiest of all the others. Pray, take counsel with yourself, my lord, and send me word if I am to withdraw my promises. Any other will follow up the affair as well and better than I can, and ought even to do so, but I alone could give you my idea with all its developments. If the plan suits you, avoid all delays. State things exactly as they are to be, so that we may consider them as signed and ratified. In any case, pray forgive the liberty I have taken by interfering in your affairs, and consider me, etc. P.S. I ask, if the idea meets with your approval, the conditions you require, those you will grant. While this negotiation was being carried on, Helene had met in the course of her frequent appearances in society Prince Frederic de Salm, who had come as if by chance to the young lady's ball. His reputation as a successful man of the world, his debts, and his conduct did little credit to the name he bore. Unscrupulous in the choice of his amusements, frequenting the worst society of doubtful courage, he commanded in Paris no sort of consideration. He was reproached on the occasion of a duel he fought with an officer of the King's Guards, with having taken the precaution of secretly protecting himself with a large muff. On arriving at the ground, he refused to undress and rushed on his adversary unawares. The latter gave him a thrust that would have pierced him through and through had it not been for the protecting muff. The recoil caused by this obstacle threw the officer to the ground, and the seconds had all the difficulty in the world to prevent the prince from killing his fallen adversary. The Prince de Salm had a handsome face, easy manners, a gay disposition, and a supple mind. Helene ignored the dishonourable details of his private life. She only saw in him an elegant cavalier, bearing a great name, and above all the certainty of a fixed residence in Paris, in the magnificent mansion the Salms built on the Quai d'Orsay. She would not hear of the Duc d'Elbeuf, in spite of his brilliant prospects. She dreaded Madame de Brionne as a mother-in-law, and allowed herself to be strongly influenced by Prince de Salm's friends, who did not miss an opportunity of exciting the young girl's imagination. The bishop, led by his niece, returned an ambiguous answer, adjourned his decision, spoke of a probable journey to Paris, and ended by no longer concealing the fresh candidature of the Prince de Salm. The Comtesse de Brionne ardently desired to continue the negotiations, and she consulted Mirabeau as to the best means of attaining her end. The Marquis replied in a long letter, of which the following is an extract. It is absolutely necessary that the Countess should have as representative a staid and honourable man acting on her authority, and capable of defeating the intrigues he will meet with. National jealousy, errors of fact, important changes in places and ideas, distractions and dissipations of all kinds, in fact, every sort of disappointment await him, quite enough to worry out of his mind any sensible man. It must, however, be borne in mind that he must not be expected to conclude, treat, or decide anything, but only to obtain ample and reliable information as to the family possessions, customs, etc., to keep the bishop in a favourable frame of mind, to sketch out the conditions with him, and try to bring him round to our views. I cannot deny that this is too much to expect from a man alone in a strange country. For this there is only one remedy, which, if we can obtain it, I think will succeed. It is to get the Abbé Baudot to accompany him on the journey. I know all that can be said against him, and he is the first to own his faults. He would spoil any business requiring time, but an affair that has to be carried off at the outset is quite another matter. And he is the first man in Europe for that kind of thing, thanks to his business-like aptitude and resources. He is ingenious, insinuating, as good as he is scatterbrained, of easy and lively habits, knowing how to influence the bishop, which he does not by thwarting him, but by turning him round like a glove. In short, whatever objections there may be to him, we cannot have men made on purpose. This one has a clear head, will elucidate matters both here and over there. He enjoys the confidence of the young princess, and knows how to manage her. He can work up the bishop as he pleases. In fact, even had he none of these advantages, which I consider quite exceptional for the affair in hand, or did he not know the country as he does, I should think of it capital importance to employ him in carrying through a business of this kind. What I can guarantee, not only as the result of my express warning, but also by the fact that he has already suffered from it, is that he will not meddle with politics or economy or any other subject of discussion, and that, provided his travelling companion behaves to him in a simple and friendly way, neither allowing himself to be ruled by him, nor still less contradicting him openly, he will be quite satisfied with him and will find him most useful. I must appear to write at great length on this subject, but I assure you that I am actuated by no prejudice. In reality, I have more liking than is supposed for sensible business. But try watering cabbages with lavender water, and you will see if they grow. Notwithstanding the Marquis's eloquence, the Abbé Badeau did not start for Poland as the negotiations fell through. By a second letter, the Prince Bishop, under the influence of his niece, declined for her the honour of entering the House of Lorraine. The unsuccessful result of the negotiations undertaken by Madame de Paris had vexed her much. She feared the displeasure of the Countess de Brionne, and still more that of her aunt, the Princesse de Ligne Luxembourg, whom she had special reasons for wishing to please. The princess, formerly lady-in-waiting to the late Queen of Spain, had by virtue of that office been given by the king an apartment in the palace of the Tuileries. She received a limited but carefully chosen circle, of which Madame de Paris would have been proud to form part, though her society was a very dull one. The old princess, according to her contemporaries, had the most hideous 50-year-old face that had ever been seen, a fat, shiny countenance without any rouge, lividly pale, and adorned with a chin 3 stories deep. The Duchess de Tallard used to say that she was like a dripping tallow candle, but she was obliging and kind, and soon consoled herself for the failure of the projected marriage. She confided to the negotiating lady that she had another scheme in view. This time she had turned her thoughts to Prince Charles de Ligne, nephew of her late husband. In point of fortune, the young prince's position was far superior to that of the Duc de Beauf, and if his family occupied in France a less elevated rank than that of the House of Lorraine, which was a reigning family, on the score of nobility it was inferior to none. Madame de Paris, delighted at the confidence the princess reposed in her, thanked her for it as a favour, and set to work resolved to profit by the experience she had acquired and avoid another failure. She began by making the Abbé Badeau and the Marquis write to the Prince Bishop that nothing could be concluded in his absence, and that among the crowd of suitors which every day increased, it was impossible he could discern at a distance what would be the best match for his niece. When she cleverly tried to discover what was the influence which had been brought to bear on the young princess that disposed her so strongly in favour of the Prince de Salm, she learned that he had gained over to his cause one of the lady residents in the convent, whom Helene frequently went to see. And we have a footnote. This lady was no other than the Marquise de Mesnard, separated from her husband, the Marquis de Marny, brother to Madame de Pompadour. She inhabited in 1778 a magnificent apartment in the Abbaye aux Bois, where she received the most brilliant society. She was on intimate terms with the Prince Cardinal Louis de Rohan and with the Princesse de Salm, mother of Prince Frederick. Once fully acquainted with all the details of the situation, she drew up her batteries accordingly and won over to her side 3 of Helene's best friends, the young Duchess de Choiseul, the Mesdemoiselles de Conflans. She got mutual friends to urge them quietly to influence the young princess, and then patiently waited the arrival of the bishop, which could not long be delayed. Before seriously opening up negotiations, the Princess de Ligne had written to Prince Charles and his mother to inform them of her plan and of the advantages she saw in this alliance. But she did not hide the preference over his numerous competitors which the young girl showed towards the Prince Frederic de Salm. Prince Charles did not seem very much flattered and wrote to his aunt as follows. March 1779. I have received, my dear aunt, the letters you have had the goodness to write to me, and have immediately forwarded them to my father. I foresee that there will be many difficulties in the affair you mention. It will require all the perseverance you possess with regard to what interests you, and tax to the utmost your kindness towards the whole of our family, a kindness whereof we are deeply sensible, and for which, once more, my dear aunt, we offer you our best thanks. The little lady appears to me of decided character, and not very delicate in her choice, since she prefers the Prince de Salm, who has such a bad reputation. I only hope the bishop will not decide, for it takes so long to receive the answers. Receive, my dear aunt, etc. From this letter it appears that the young prince was not very much delighted at the proposed marriage, but his mother took up the matter with more eagerness and begged her cousin to continue the negotiations. The latter, then staying at her niece's, Madame de Brionne, in the Chateau de Nemours, wrote to Madame de Palis and offered to come herself to Paris to talk over the great affair. Madame de Palis replies, I had hoped, Madame, that this week would not have elapsed without your coming to Paris. I greatly desire to have the honor of seeing you, in order to tell you about our affair. You may be sure that I have made the best possible use of what you deign to inform me. It would be too long for me to write you all that has been said on one side and on the other. But the last word of our uncle is that he must know what will be the total fortune of the young prince in the future, and what allowance his father means to give him at present. He has repeated several times that that was the essential point to be cleared up, that he found all the other conditions most suitable, that with regard to the residence in Brussels, his niece was very sensible, and that he flattered himself he would have no difficulty in persuading her, if that was the only obstacle in the way. It is true that he adds, but may we not hope that the Prince de Ligne will come to Paris? I answered that I thought not, and indeed that his change of residence would not be to his advantage, that I thought his niece would find it very agreeable to be at the same time a great lady in Brussels, in Vienna, and at Versailles, that the Prince de Ligne's establishments in Flanders were such that they were preferable to any that might be had elsewhere. Madame de Palis conducted the whole business very cleverly. She called on the young princess, and feigning to ignore the preference that Helene openly avowed for the Prince de Salm, she carefully avoided mentioning the subject, but she boldly faced the other obstacle, that of an establishment in Brussels. She dwelt at great length on the exceptional position of the Princess de Ligne in Vienna and in the Netherlands, or rather the Princes de Ligne in Vienna and in the Netherlands. Then she gave a most brilliant description of that occupied by the prince's father at Versailles, where he spent most of his time when free from military service. She gave Helene to understand that with the great preference the prince showed for the French court, she would easily find in him an ally towards obtaining an establishment in Paris. For he adored his son and would be happy to have him near. Only it was essential to gain time, and care should be taken not to clash with the Princess de Ligne, who was the least disposed to accept this arrangement. This conversation made a tolerably deep impression on Helene, who for the first time did not oppose a formal refusal to the proposed alliance with the Prince de Ligne. She merely asked to be allowed to reflect, and to await the arrival of her uncle before making a decision. The delay was granted, and more easily that the Princes de Ligne, both father and son, were at that time engaged with the army, Austria being at war with Prussia as to the succession of the Electorate of Bavaria. We will now leave Helene to her reflections and turn our attention to the two personages who are about to play such an important part in her life. And that is the end of Chapter 2 of Part 2 of Volume 1. So, of course, from her name, we know that she is going to marry the Prince de Ligne, but we will see how this unfolds. And it's probably a good thing for her that she didn't get to marry her first choice, because I can only imagine what her life would have been like with a husband who apparently gets up to no good and is, fighting duels and probably gambling and that sort of thing. But yes, we will leave it at that for now.